I'm Leif Kendall. I'm the director of ProCopywriters, and we're joined today by Kelvin Newman. Now, Kelvin's the owner of Rough Agenda. Now, Rough Agenda puts on all kinds of events for digital marketers, particularly the runaway success that is Brighton SEO, which is a conference in Brighton twice a year. And before that, he spent, I believe, more than a decade working as an SEO manager and operative. So if anyone knows anything more about SEO, I'm not sure who that is. So thank you for joining us, Kelvin.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks everybody for making it along this afternoon. We've got a really interesting session planned for you, which I hope will kind of take you through some of the big opportunities that there are in SEO, and depending on where you are, whether you're completely new to SEO, hopefully it'll give you some more confidence to reflect upon some of the ways in which search engine optimization can improve your copywriting process. And indeed, if you're more experienced, maybe give you some slightly different ways of thinking about the challenge of how to make your copy more effective from a SEO point of view. So without further ado, I'll get started and sort of talk about myself and where we are. So my name's Kelvin Newman. As Lee said, I'm the founder of Brighton SEO, and I'll tell you a bit about the story of that, because that's always useful to set the context of who I am and where my experience of search comes from. But if you do ever want to get in contact with me, I'm going to share the slides on SlideShare afterwards at the link there, and of course you can drop me an email if you're so inclined as well. So Brighton SEO started out as a few people meeting in an upstairs room of the pub that we've got on the screen there. So that's the Quadrant, which is a very small pub by the Clock Tower in Brighton, and really it's grown from there. So to the extent that we get 4,000 people coming to the event now from 40 different countries. So how did it all start? So once upon a time, I decided it'd be cool to get a group of SEO mates together in the pub to talk shop. And the idea was to share ideas and chat about interesting stuff that you can only really talk about with people who do the same job as you, because for anyone else, it'd be incredibly boring and they'd probably fall asleep. So that first event that we did, the word got out and more people showed up than we expected. So next time round, we booked a larger room and more people came than we had room for. And that carried on as the process as we moved through a variety of venues in Brighton. And eventually we kind of fell upon this sort of, I suppose, mission or objective that we had in the events that we were organising, that we wanted to create a place where search marketers could meet, learn and discover ways to do their job a little better. So to bring you more up to date from, we're a long way from that room above a pub now. So in September 2017, we had 3,500 tickets that sold out in under 5 minutes. And we ended up with 1,500 people on the wait list for those tickets. In April this year, we had our usual free ticket release that we talked about there, and we managed to crash a major ticketing platform for an hour. And now we've switched to a ballot where we end up with twice as many people trying to get hold of tickets as we have room for. So why am I talking about that? Well, hopefully that gives you a sense of, in the process of organising this event, I program all of the talks that we have, and hopefully that gives me a good sense of what the industry as a whole is up to and what they're most excited about, what their day-to-day job involves and entails, and hopefully give a bit of a perspective on what that means for copy. So my background prior to getting into search was working in the publishing industry. I worked for a magazine publishing company, which at the time was known as EMAP. It's now the bit that's in Bauer. So I've always kind of had this interest in journalism, in content and in copy. And that's how I came to search. And a lot of people sometimes think of search as maybe a technical discipline, but actually increasingly through the events, a lot of the people who find themselves working in search either could have been copywriters or were copywriters in a previous role. So what's my one key takeaway, the thing I hope that we all sort of leave today's session with? Well, don't write for search engines is actually probably the big one. Instead, what you want to do is write for what search engines think users want. So really, if you're thinking of the search engines, the Googles, the Bings, the Yandexes in Russia, the Baidus in China, what they're all trying to do when serving a search result up is kind of answer the user's question, right? So they're trying to do the job of understanding what users want. But of course, they're not able to do that, right? They're not able to read our minds. They have to use a series of proxies to do that. But the reality is of writing for what search engines think users want is actually pretty similar to writing for what users want. Which I'd imagine, knowing what I do about the people who are attending today, is probably something that you're already pretty decent at. So the good news is that search is probably just a little bit of an add-on. It's not kind of a fundamental shift or change in the approach that you take to producing copy. So I'm going to talk predominantly today under the assumption that when you're doing your job, you might have a brief that says we need to, reflect the needs of SEO in that process of producing copy. But of course, this is equally applicable if in the process of trying to promote your own business or your agency to gain business and clients as well. So really, if you take a bit of a step back, think about what the search engines are trying to do. Really, their objective, their mission is, when deciding what ranks and what doesn't rank, what appears and what doesn't appear, and within those that do appear, the order of those search results, really what they're trying to do is find the best answer to a searcher's question. Now, of course, the best in that previous sentence is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting. What do we mean by best? Well, that's one of these nitty-gritty questions that people who work in search marketing can spend a lot of time arguing, debating, evaluating what they mean by best. But for those of us that's not our day job and we don't have to worry about the nitty-gritty of that, actually what the best websites are in the eyes of the search engine is probably quite similar, as we say, to what's the best website or best web page in the eyes of users, right? That is, if we look at, lots and lots of different websites, what do those that are the best have in common, right? So if we take a step back, they probably look quite good, right? So they've got some element of design or visual representation that means that it's effective, right? And of course, you're going to get varies, and some people prefer some versions of a design, but on average, in aggregate, websites that look and are better designed and work better tend to perform better on average than those that don't look so good and don't work so well. That's usability, right? There's also that they read well. So the sheer fact is that websites that are poorly written, on average, tend to do worse than those that are well written, right? And of course, one, hard to get your finger right on, but it's the best websites are those that you can trust, right? Those which either implicitly are designed in such a way and communicate in such a way that we instantly are able to trust them, or indeed we're looking at and inferring things about them, right? So design has an impact on that, familiarity of logo, things like social proof as well. But there is one mega super important caveat to that, right? So it's those that look good, that are written well, that we can trust in a way that search engines can understand, right? So a search engine can't say this is good design or this is bad design. They're not able to kind of see that, internal evaluation that we take. There are measures and metrics that they use to try and infer that, right? They can't understand that something reads well. They can just infer that it reads well from a variety of different sources. And in a crux, that's really what SEO is all about, right? So it's about making websites look better, read better, and become more trusted, but in a way in which search engines can understand. So the nitty-gritty of search often is in ways search engines can understand. So a search marketer's job is to understand what can search engines, use and understand and reflect upon, and how can we kind of improve those kind of measures. But for lots of people, actually, the easiest way to do better in search is to worry about the first part of that, right? So how to look better, read better, and become more trusted. And we would hope that the search engines do a good job of understanding that. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'm predominantly going to concentrate on the process of keyword research, because I do think for anyone working in copy that this is probably one of the biggest opportunities, right? So I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of technical SEO. I'm going to talk more about the process that people in search marketing would describe as keyword research, because I think that if you can understand the keywords, the words in which people use, then if we're able to reflect that in our copy, we're going to do a much better job. So what is this presentation about? I know we will have people here today listening to us who have, know absolutely nothing about SEO. There'll be others who it's a big part of what you do day to day. Well, what this presentation isn't about isn't saying, hey, there's this tool, it's called Google Keyword Planner, you should use it, it'll teach you some excellent keywords. I'll take it as a given that you're all smart, intelligent, articulate people. You can go to a tool like Google's Keyword Planner, spend half an hour looking at it, and get insights into the types of keywords or phrases that people are searching for. But the reality is, in a search result, it is a competition, not between the website and Google, but between all of the websites in that space where Google is acting as the referee. So what you need to do is do a better job than your competitors. And if everyone's using exactly the same tools to do that, then potentially they're getting the same insights and they're responding in exactly the same ways. So what I wanted to do was take you through some slightly different ways of gaining insight to your customers, and hopefully that will help you gain better insights into the ways you can, write your copy. So it isn't rocket science, right? I'm just going to share a few nice practical ways to get some keyword ideas that you might not have considered before. So if I do my job here, I'm going to give you some, tricksy, interesting ways of gaining some insight to your customers that might influence the process of producing copy, that by doing that, you're better able to do better in the search results. So earlier on, I did say just write for your users. Well, that's an easy suggestion to make, right? And in fact, I would, if I had to ask you the question, is anyone here not writing for their audience, right? It's just one of those kind of given things. Instead, what we need to do is ask ourselves, well, how can we, do a better job of writing for our audience? And I'm going to say, well, how can we use keyword research to better understand our users? Because if we understand our users, I think we're in a good place, right? So I think, this is my position that I'm taking, is that I think we can better understand our users' needs when we better understand how other websites are writing about a topic. So a lot of these processes I'm going to take you through is about taking content that exists around a topic and kind of taking a kind of analytical approach to that content as it exists. And when we take that analytical approach, hopefully that'll act as an influence on us when we then go and produce other content that exists in that ecosystem. So to understand this, I kind of have, I suppose, a perception that what is involved in SEO has changed over the years. So in the past, particularly in this kind of interaction between copywriting and SEO, there might have been a perception that to do SEO, all you needed to do was add some keywords, add some key phrases to the existing content. And, certainly there still is some value in kind of understanding what people are searching for, adding those and sprinkle them through your copy that you've already written. But I actually think it's a little bit more sophisticated than that now. I think the search engines are looking for and expecting phrases or words that they would expect a piece of content in this space to contain, right? So it's a shift in model. So it's more about, and as I talk about keywords all the way through here, I think this is an important distinction to get across. It's more than just those words, right? And this is something I think people who care about copy and content really get. It's that actually what we're doing here is taking the keywords and appreciating that they represent ideas or concepts, right? So when we're looking at the words here, I am saying don't just cut and paste the word you find in a keyword tool into your copy, because that's just going to be clunky. It's not going to work very well. Instead, what I'm talking about with these processes is let's use these words to go, this word represents a thing, an idea, a concept. And perhaps these are topics or areas we ought to be writing about or reflecting in our content. So what do I mean? Well, this is that shift in the model. So the old model would be, is the search query on the page? So that's the first stage, the kind of filter process. And then we have the ranking. So does it deserve to rank? And I think now instead what the search engines are probably doing, saying is, does it contain the search query, the phrase that people have searched for? But does it also contain similar terms, phrases, concepts, ideas as the other pages that rank for that term? And then does it deserve to rank? So you're getting this idea of kind of, if someone's writing about a particular topic, if they're writing about kind of insulation, I'm just in the process of refurbing my home office at the moment. I've been reading about insulation. If a page is talking about home insulation, it should say things. It should have the words like PIR. It should have these kind of ideas of R value. These are sort of the topics that are related to that area. If they're absent, that says something a bit peculiar about that content. Now, you might notice, and I've done this a few times here, and I try to remind myself to do this, is I try to refer to search queries, perhaps rather than search keywords or search phrases, because I think that's a really useful prompt to remind me and remind anyone that searchers are ultimately, when they're going to a search engine, aren't asking a question, right? So they're saying, I'm really interested in this topic. I want to find out about, I want to buy, I want to do. It's a question ultimately. So thinking of search queries is a powerful way of reminding yourself that that's the case. So this is the first of these methods I'm going to take you through. So this is kind of a process of text analysis, right? So I am going to suggest that you take, for a particular search query that you would hoping to be targeting, you would take the top 10 results, so the pages that appear for that search query in position 1 to 10, and use a tool like Textise.net, which is a free tool. And what that does simply is it kind of removes the design elements. So if we take a particular page like we've got here, so this is a page on The Guardian, probably recognize the format there. And what Textise does is turn it into sort of plain text, really. It's a bit like the reader view on mobile devices, really. So it removes all the design elements. So then we've fundamentally just got the text that's on that page. Now, interestingly, when you do a process like this, you begin to see how much of the text that's on the page is actually sort of, not page specific. So for example, here we've got the date, we've got the share on Facebook, the share on Twitter, we've got the play video text, all of that there is occurring, there in the text. And any search engine, when they try to understand a page, has to discount that text, which is interesting. So what we do is we take those 10 pages and we copy all of the text of all of those 10 pages into a Wordcloud tool. Now, there's lots of Wordcloud tools out there. I really like this one from Jason Davis, jasondavis.com/Wordcloud. And what that allows you to do is you take all of the words on all of those 10 pages. So we've got thousands of words for a particular search query. And what a Wordcloud does, and you'll be familiar with this, is it takes all of that text, sees how frequently the words are used, and then gives you a visual representation of the text that's contained on that in that cut and paste text. So what we've got on the screen here is for a particular search query, car financing, we have a visual representation of how frequently words are used across all of the different websites. So sometimes people do this for their own website. I'm a big fan of doing it for multiple websites because then we can see the patterns, the trends across multiple websites. So in many cases, this is all very obvious, right? So if we're talking about car finance, it'd be quite hard to talk about car finance without using the word finance, right? I'm not teaching anybody new that would be something that they want to do. But instead, I'm looking for other terms or phrases or concepts or ideas that are in here that we might not have thought about, right? So PCP, an acronym, that's one that would make sense there as well. But I'm particularly looking things for like GMFV, right? Which is kind of the gross value at the end of the PCP product that you're doing. So I would say that lots of these websites are writing about that. And if I haven't talked about that, then that would be, a kind of unusual piece of content, right? If it had an absence of those particular phrases or the ideas around that. We've then got some that are slightly less frequent. So we've got things like offset in their teen as well for people who are kind of like trying to finance cars when they're a teenager. So again, what we're doing here is seeing the patterns of topics that are there. Now, what I'm not saying is go through necessarily and bundle iPhone in there because a few pages mention iPhone. Instead, what I'm saying is look for the topics, the ideas that we might have excluded. So what is in there that you're not covering in your piece, right? So you'll say you're producing a piece of copy. What topics, which ideas, which concepts are on that screenshot that I showed you previously that aren't in your piece? And if they're not, that's fine. It might well be that you've made a decision to exclude them. But if there isn't a good reason for why you've excluded them, I'd argue that's the type of thing that you might want to include. This is method 2. Again, it's going to use Textise. So what I'm now going to do is take the top 2 results for a search query and your own website that's targeting that search query. Again, do the Textise things. I now want to take all the single words that are used on those pages. So there's a URL there that will allow you to do that. And that essentially gives you a list like this. So we've got, in this particular screen here, you can see we've got the number of times the word appears and then the word itself, right? So all of those kind of like functional preposition bits of words are all in there as well. The, to, car, of, a, all of that sort of thing. And what I then do is create a Venn diagram. So there's one I quite like called Venny, a URL there you can share. As I say, I'll share the slides afterwards so you can get all these URLs. And what that then does is allow me to take all of the words that are featured on all of those pages and kind of produce a Venn diagram. You'll all be familiar with Venn diagrams. So this can now tell me what's this Auto Express using and Car Buyers using and Money Saving Expert, what are they all using, right? And the overlaps between them. But I'm particularly interested in the words or phrases that overlap between a competitor, but I don't include. Now, in some cases, those words might be kind of just not appropriate for you as a business to be referencing. But I guarantee you there'll be words that are in there that could be included in your copy. And what I'm saying is, don't be thinking just of the words. That's important. Be thinking of the concepts or ideas that those words represent, the topics, the subtopics that you potentially could include in a piece to make it more broadly reflect what other people in the market are talking about. Again, you'll see this slide again. What ideas are in there that you're not covering? And if you're not covering them, is there a reason for that? And if there isn't a good reason, maybe it's the sort of thing you should be including. So this is another method. We're going to take a key ranking page of a competitor. We're going to Textise it, save it as a Word doc. We're going to translate it into French, and then we're going to translate it into Spanish, and then back into English again. Now, we end up with absolute gobbledygook at this stage. But instead, what I'm looking for is the subtle differences between those 2 different versions. So we've got here an old version and the mashed up new version, and it doesn't always make sense. But what we're looking for are words or phrases that end up in the new version that weren't in the original, right? All we're doing here is using essentially Google Translate is a very clever thesaurus. And in this particular example I showed there, talking about insulation, we've now got words or phrases that weren't in the original piece, like townhouse, insulating panels, which is exactly the type of thing, if I'm writing an article about insulating your home, making reference to townhouses, talking about insulating panels rather than other terms or phrases we might use, is a really good way of getting words or phrases that we might have otherwise ignored. So again, what ideas are in there that's not in your piece? And if they're not in there, why have you excluded them? Okay, so this is a slightly different approach now, using image search in order to generate new keyword ideas. So you'll probably be very used to seeing at the bottom of search results pages, and you might even be using this to inspire your copywriting or blog posts that you produce, this idea of kind of related searches. So if I was searching for Sussex wedding venues, at the bottom of the page, usually, I'd probably get some results a bit like this, where it's giving me searches related to Sussex wedding venues. And often these are really good ideas for keywords you might target or things you might write about. There are even tools out there to do that. One of the most popular of these is Ubersuggest. I'm not a big fan of Ubersuggest. I much prefer Answer the Public. So definitely use Answer the Public if you want these types of keyword suggestions. But you might not realize you can get related search questions in image search. And I think image search presents it in a really interesting and dynamic way that I think is incredibly powerful for thinking about things you could be writing about and ways you could be writing about a topic. So we've got the same sort of seed keyword, the same sort of starting point there, which is Sussex wedding venues. And you can see here we've got additional keywords that when people are using image search are kind of refinements to that search query. So we have rustic wedding, outdoor wedding, beach wedding, luxury wedding, reception, unique, bohemian, East Sussex, West Sussex, quirky, outside, right? So you can see all of these different areas or topics that might be blog posts you could write or elements of keywords you might target. I quite like the way that it's done visually as well. Then if you click on any of those, you then get additional suggestions as well. So this is a sort of a step beyond. So if I was on Sussex wedding venues, I click on beach weddings, I then get additional kind of refinements off the back of that as well. And again, some of these are geographically related here. So we've got East Sussex, Brighton, Cooden Beach, Canberra, Rye. All of these are particular places, but we've got other ones that are perhaps slightly different. So castle, hotel, different ones there as well. And I also quite like the way that it categorizes. There's sort of an implied categorization implied by the colors. So here we're looking at wedding dresses. And you can see here that they're kind of these keywords and the way in which they're grouped gives you ways of thinking about it. So let's take that same thing here. So we've got material. So we've got lacy and lace. We've got an adjective one. So we've got elegant, sweetheart, and mermaid. We've got David's bridal. So we've got a brand. We've got a style one there. So empire waist, boat neck, drop waist. And then we've also got context, right? So outdoor wedding, rustic wedding, etc. Now, these are really powerful, not only for the suggestions that they bring, but kind of the way in which they can send you off thinking about other types of ones. So I'd say, well, what other materials could you use as adjectives for wedding dresses? What other brands are there? What other styles? What other contexts are there that we could use from this to get ideas for things we could be writing about or keywords we ought to be including in our existing content? I also think this is something that will probably come very naturally to you as an audience, which is the idea of adjective order, which I don't think, particularly in the search industry, we do a particularly good job of talking about this. So, this is, I don't know if you saw this viral tweet from a couple of years ago, but it certainly stuck with me. So things native English speakers know, but don't know that we know. Adjectives in English absolutely have to be in this order: opinion, size, age, shape, colour, origin, material, purpose, noun. So you can have a lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife. But if you mess with that word order in the slightest, you'll sound like a maniac. It's an odd thing that every English speaker uses this list, but almost none of us could write it out. And as size comes before colour, great green dragons can't exist. Now, the good news is that they teach this to English language students, so people learning English language, and it's particularly challenging. But it's interesting to kind of, when thinking about words that people are going to search for, this order that we've got: opinion, size, physical quality, age, shape, colour, origin, material, and purpose, are quite powerful. Now, these are starting points. Each of these 9 sectors are kind of things you could add to a keyword to make it more precise. But when you start stacking them on top of each other, you can quickly find this idea of the words people might be using to describe a particular product or service. And of course, this is going to become only ever more apparent with voice search. So as people, instead of typing into a search query box, say it aloud in some way, shape or form, I think we're going to fall back to these natural ways of speaking, in ever increasing frequency. Also, just as an aside here as well, we looked at the Google image search for suggestions of keywords. Pinterest does something very similar as well. So I was looking for glass garage doors, and then again, using the colours a bit less distinct here, we've got kind of additional refinements that people are using on Pinterest around those topics. So again, barn, home, modern, frosted, restaurant. All of these are things I could be writing about, things I could be reflecting in my content. Okay, so Method 5, Wordcloud text on Pinterest search results. Again, not a lot of text usually on a Pinterest page, but the text that is there is often very, very descriptive and kind of often adjective rich. And adjectives are kind of the bread and butter of a lot of search engine keyword research. So the same page we just had up there, put for a word cloud, we then start to see things like that. So obviously my name's appearing in there because that was on the page as well. But we're then able to see things like carriage, anthracite, conversion, sizes we've got there as well. So these are, again, all ideas, concepts, words we might like to reflect into and bring into our particular pieces of content that we're producing. Again, really quick and hacky one, taking a competitor's Twitter feed, word clouding it, again, is an incredibly useful way of thinking about, well, what is that website talking about? So maybe you're sat there listening to this presentation kind of going, well, Kelvin, that's amazing, but isn't this a really complicated way of ending up with exactly the same copy as other websites? Well, I actually think that the creativity in producing great copy, in great content, comes from the constraints. And I think including the topics, words or phrases that people are using is one of those constraints. And in fact, actually, if you want to produce copy, you want to produce content, you want to produce a website, what you really are getting at is you want to talk to people, right? You want to communicate with them. And if you're able to use the words or language or concepts or ideas they're interested in and that they're already using, I think then the creativity comes in how you put that together, how you then have the tone of voice that's there to kind of create something that's compelling and appropriate to an audience. But if you're able to use these as starting points, as maybe constraints, or at least kind of, I think, jumping off points into a topic, that I think places you really nicely to do well. And the reality is that in many cases, to do better SEO, you often don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to do a few things, like some of the keyword research processes we've talked about, just a little bit better than you used to, or a little bit better than your competitors in the space as well. So that's me. I think we've got a few questions there ready to go. But yeah, hopefully that's given you a real whistle-stop tour of some of the ways you can improve your keyword research. Now, if I was putting together a presentation today on this topic, I could have gone into how to write better title tags, how to write meta descriptions, what to reflect in the HTML of your pages. Now, that is all useful and powerful stuff. But in many cases, actually, what the job of someone who is trying to do well in the search engines is really about is the process of understanding the words or phrases, the ideas, the concepts that their users, their customers, their audience have, and reflect them. And if you're doing a good job of that, in many cases, you're going to be really well placed for the other stuff that's often hygiene factors, like you're just using good descriptive headlines. But hopefully that's given you a good sense of some of the things, the trends of where we're headed in search marketing, and some good, easy ways you can get some good keyword ideas to maybe make your content just that little bit better.
Thank you, Kelvin. That was very interesting. And actually, I was just thinking that what you were describing there would be very useful when you're coming up with ideas for content, whether for yourself, for your own blog, or for your clients. And I think it's something that a lot of copywriters struggle with.
Yeah.
It's something that we have to do a lot of. And that, like, looking at what are people searching for, what are people interested in, and then how can we address those interests and queries. It has a kind of a dual purpose.
Yeah, I probably framed that a bit more about how can you like sub-edit or copy edit for SEO. But in many cases, yeah, exactly that process we're looking at. Like, for example, the Google image searches kind of, refinements that they had there for a search query, that would be great for content ideas. So on the wedding dress one, it's like, like maybe if you're writing a blog post about the 10, most on trend designs for, wedding dresses, and that's the prompt that you've got to do that, using a tool like that to kind of come up with the subheadings for your blog post is incredibly powerful. And whenever I'm kind of tasked with, I've got to produce a blog post, I always like to, I start on a sheet of paper and trying to create a list of the subheadings of the topics that my content's going to break down into. And yeah, keyword research like that, I think, is a great way of doing that because, if nothing else, it's a prompt. And it might well be that, you don't need to, in some cases, it's not even about initially worrying about how many people are searching for that. It's instead just kind of going, well, I've got a blank sheet of paper and I need to come out with a blog post at the end. And these can be great ways to sort of, start off that process of thinking about that. And, it's often about, with keyword research, it's not about the suggestions that come out of the tool. It's the idea it gives you to be able to be inventive off the back of that.
Fantastic. So we're ahead of schedule. We're doing very well for time. So has anyone listening got any questions about SEO? It doesn't just have to be about keyword research and the things that Kelvin was talking about. It could be literally anything. Now is your opportunity to ask an expert. So we'll give you a few more minutes to type in your questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up a little bit early. Actually, I've just seen a question come in from Graham Southern.
Yep.
How important are links from other sites to your own in terms of ranking results? And this is a tricky one. What's the best way of going about getting them?
Yeah, big old question, big old topic, but an important one. So yeah, certainly like the the ability for a website to be seen as trustworthy in the eyes of the search engines is really significant in how they decide who appears in what order. So the first thing I kind of think of it is that I think of of search engines doing a filter, then a sort, right? So the first process is they kind of go, well, which pages could appear for this search result? So that's where the filtering process is kind of going on. And that's where if you've not got the words or phrases that would be expected on a topic, then you don't get through that filtering process. But once you've got through that filtering process, there's then a sorting process. And again, it's looking at kind of, are the keywords in the right place? But in many cases, most competitive keywords, it's looking at how trusted is this website? Does it deserve to appear there? And the proxy, the way in which the search engines try to understand that is by going, well, if a website is referenced on lots of other websites, then it's probably a good website, right? So the way I take this back, if any of you did sort of like English literature or media studies or any of those kind of degrees, when you were doing your research for those courses, you read the reading material and the people that were referenced in that reading material, you might then go off and read, because if it's referenced in lots of papers, then that's probably a good one. And that's the model that they're using. So what that means is one of the things search engines look at to determine the order of those pages that have made it through that filtering process is this site a trusted website? So links is a part of that, right? So the links that you have are a big part of how they determine that. Now, the reality is that Google don't really want people building links because they think it kind of manipulates and messes with this kind of ecosystem that they've got of understanding which is the most important websites. But people do, right? So there's this process of link building. It's a big topic that comes up in our conference. It's something I wrote a book about a couple of years ago. It's still really, really important. But I think the better way of thinking about it is, how can I get traffic to my website from others? And if that's what you're going in with the objective of, and the link is the natural way that you're getting traffic from those other websites, the websites that are going to send you traffic through the links are those that are going to be passing value. So when the question is, I think it was Graham asking about kind of, how do I go about building them? Instead, be thinking about, well, who has traffic that my website might be of interest to? And thinking about it in that frame of mind, I think is usually then going to deliver the kind of links that have the most value. If you're trying to find hacky kind of ways of getting links that aren't going to send traffic to you, it might have some value to the search engines at the moment, but it's certainly not going to have longevity. So as the search engines over time get ever more sophisticated and appreciating, which websites have traffic and which websites don't away from search, they're getting much better able to see which links have genuine value. And having value outside of SEO usually means sending traffic. So I'm asking, well, who has an audience that I'm interested in, that might be interested in what we're doing? How can we kind of get featured on their website? And in many cases, that's contributing, right? So it's contributing to their website, or it's PR, or it's producing content on your website that then gets referenced by other people. So that's usually where I start, by kind of going, who has an audience who I can build a relationship with, and also what assets, what can I build on my website that is useful enough to people that they will themselves reference it.
Thank you, Kelvin. And this is one of the reasons why at ProCopywriters we encourage our members to share their articles with us. So we republish our members' articles, and in those they can include a link back to their website. And obviously that's coming from a very relevant website, and also our audience are normally quite curious about other copywriters, and we have clients looking at our website as well. So the audience is interested as well. So it's not just a link for the sake of it, but it makes sense. It has context and it's relevant. So I always think that's a really good example of a place to get a link from.
Yeah, I think, attribution.
It makes total sense. Yeah,
I think if it's kind of an attribution or a byline, that's, it adds value. So, I think, and there's a kind of challenge at the moment in the world of SEO where people are kind of producing often kind of what might be thought of as like a linkable asset. So they're producing a white paper, a survey, interactive tool or whatever it is. and then often getting like mentions, but not necessarily links. And a mention can have some value. There's certainly evidence that seems to suggest if people are talking about you, even if they're not linking, that can perhaps indirectly rather than directly improve your search engine rankings. But the best way of thinking about it is, well, how can I, if someone is writing about some research I've done, how do I make sure that it's their piece isn't as good if it isn't linking through to the one that the original source. So I think that kind of how can I get people to attribute things to me is often a really good way of doing it. And actually, in many cases, these are all kind of very heavily correlated with the kind of things that would do well on social media, would do well in PR, would do well in product marketing as well. So there's a friend of mine has this kind of like, if you're a fried chicken shop and you wanted to get lots of links, what's the best way of doing that? Well, the best place to start is by having really good fried chicken, right? So in many cases, the product that you produce is going to have the biggest impact on that. So it's very hard to kind of get links to a website that's for a boring product that is not very well presented. But if you've got a really interesting product that's well presented, well considered, has a good proposition, then when you're doing your PR, when you're doing your link building, it's a much easier process to go through because you're, worthy of attention.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks, Kelvin. And then we've got another big question from Rowan Martin. This is quite comprehensive about keywords. So if a client asks a copywriter like one of us for keywords for their website, what exactly do they want? How many keywords should we give them, and how do we present that to them?
Yeah, but that is very much every SEO, every different agency, every different SEO freelancer will have a slightly different approach of how they present their keywords. Usually, it kind of, if you think of the output the keyword research has, usually the output of that is like a ranking report. So the idea is that you can then say, well, this month you were position 10 for these keywords, and then you were position 9 for these keywords, and this month each of those have gone up by 2 positions, or a couple of them have gone down. So usually the output is an Excel spreadsheet, right? So what they usually, and this is probably not really right, but what usually when people say is, I want some keyword research done, what they're really getting, it might not be what they need, but what they're getting is a list of keywords that they would like to rank for in a list format. Then that list might turn itself into a report that's saying, well, for that keyword, you're in position 10, for example. And that's useful, and I can kind of understand that's kind of a packageable up a piece of content that someone can deliver to someone. But usually what happens is, particularly in SEO projects, is the keyword research happens in month 1, then the reports are automatically generated by a piece of software that no one reads, and then nothing happens off the back of that. Whereas instead, really what keyword research should do is forming like a key input into your content strategy, right? So when you're producing your content strategy that I imagine many of Rowan and other people will be involved in, you're kind of saying what keyword research is maybe a step before that content strategy, which is what are people who buy the products that his clients sell interested in? And how does that vary seasonally? How is that varying over time? And are some of those areas of more interest than others? Now, in many cases, when you're doing content strategy, you've probably got a really good gut instinct of what those topics are people are going to be interested in. And in many cases, that's all keyword research is about. It's about providing some like validation, some proof that those gut instincts that you've got are right. So, if I'm looking up a good example I often talk about in keyword research is, yes, of course, you probably realize that more people search for sunglasses in the summer than in the winter, right? You probably know that instinctively. But if you're able to go, well, actually, maybe this month of the year is the most popular for those, search queries, then we're able to kind of really nicely, reflect that in the content we produce. An example I often use a lot, and it's used quite widely in the industry, is the idea of like prom dresses. So if you're an online dress, a retailer, a fashion retail place that sells prom dresses, you might think, well, proms are in the summer term, so that's when you're doing your merchandising. Maybe spring might be a good time to do it as well. Prom dresses, wedding dresses, most search volume is in January, right? That's the peak of where it is, particularly if you kind of take a week as a whole. So actually there's then kind of content strategy timing questions that are coming out of keyword research. So, Rowan, what they probably mean is they probably want a list of 150 keywords that they could be targeting to see where they're ranking. But what keyword research should actually be is kind of a strategic input that influences what they write about, when they write about it, how they write about it, and kind of the prioritization of the different topics that you might cover.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelvin. So Rowan's followed up with a question about how you know how businesses are ranking for a certain keyword, which I'm guessing you would just simply look at, you would see where they appear in search results.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
a few different ways you can do that. Yeah, I mean, if it's a small number of keywords, yeah, you just type that search query in and see where they rank. Although, except that, like on every search query, there's usually some kind of geographic targeting going on. So if I search for hairdressers here in Brighton and someone searches for hairdressers in Manchester, they're going to see completely different results because Google know that you're not going to be coming to Brighton from Manchester for a haircut. But there are a number of SEO tools, SEMrush, Moz, all of the different, many different platforms have some kind of rank checking functionality. So you input a list of keywords and it then over time reports on them. Some of these tools like SEMrush and Systrix will allow you to do that historically for keywords that you've only just come up with. But actually they all cost money, and that might not be a prime thing for you. So instead, if you're using Google Search Console, which used to be known as Google Webmaster Tools. So if you are a verified owner of a website, or a client of, that you have admin access to that website, you're able to get from Google a snapshot. It's not perfect, of they're saying for the key, where are you ranking for search terms on Google? And where did you rank over time, and how did that change? Now, it's not perfect, but it's free, so that's a good place to start. So Google Search Console. I think a few people have also asked about the SlideShare link. I'll upload these afterwards. I wanted to save it until we'd had the presentation and done that all, but they'll be up there later.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelvin. Rowan's just, I think she's very grateful for your answers, Kelvin, but she also hates SEO.
Oh, well, yeah, it's a really interesting one. I mean, and what I would say is, actually, SEO really, I think if you love words, then SEO should be something you love as well. Now, I know that like the industry of SEO and expectations that people have around SEO sometimes can make it hard to love. I'll be honest, but I think that actually what it really is what search engines allow us to do is find things we're interested in based upon the words that we use. And SEO is the process of kind of trying to understand people and the words and phrases and the infinite creativity in how people try and solve a problem that they might not know how to articulate. And I think, I'm continually fascinated and surprised by how people behave and the words they use and the phrases they think about things. And that's what I think SEO is really about. It's about this kind of ability to sort of go, oh, I didn't think people would behave in that way, but they did. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's, looking at SEO as a sort of almost like a market research tool.
Yeah, I think that's
because you can kind of see what people are searching for, how they're searching, things like that. I mean, I think I understand, Rowan, why SEO is not the most fun thing, especially when it feels very complicated. I would say it's very worth kind of sticking with it as a copywriter. I mean, even if it's purely for your own benefit, for your own website, and for your own way of finding clients. Because if you spend a bit of time on your own website and you get more people coming to your website, the people coming to you via a search engine, those are people that they've like self-selected themselves as your ideal client. They're coming to you, they're choosing you. And when they contact you, it's because they've already decided that you're probably the right copywriter for them, which I think is such an amazing, powerful thing. I mean, if you compare that to, going to networking events, cold calling, sending emails, all these other ways of finding clients are very much a kind of an uphill battle. you're putting in the effort. You're the one trying to convince somebody.
Yeah.
Whereas, you stick up a great website, you bring people to it, you let them decide.
Yeah. I think the way I think of search marketing is it's a great way of capturing existing demand, right? It's not really, it's absolutely awful at generating demand for a thing. But if someone knows that they want something and you do what it is that they want, I think it would be a terrible shame if you did precisely what someone needed and for whatever reason they weren't able to find you. If you're a specialist in a particular type of content for a particular type of organization and you had a particular set of skills and the person knows that that's what they want, but for whatever reason you didn't describe yourself in that way, and then they couldn't find you or went with someone else who actually wasn't very good at that but just did a better job of describing themselves, I think that's a particular shame.
Yeah, and actually I often felt when I started out I wasn't the best copywriter, but I was the most persistent at marketing and SEO, and that meant that I've just got lots of clients, and the more clients you get coming to you, the more selective you can be, and you can decide which ones aren't really right for you, and it does. I think it's not the most exciting topic, I think, for a lot of people, but it really is worth pursuing and delving into a little bit and doing some of this keyword research, as Kelvin has been explaining. I think it's a really simple way of just kind of taking another look at your website from another angle and just seeing it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. It is just another way, and I think SEO is perhaps in the past it was a skill set, whereas now I think it's perhaps more a mindset, which is this kind of idea of it's just a slightly different way of thinking about the problem of how do I produce something that my audience want? Well, if I can understand how they search and I can understand how to present that in a way that search engines understand, that's just a slightly different way of thinking about the blank page of let's produce some new content.
Yeah, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have, I think, is where do you begin, where do you start, and actually this could give you some very clear guidelines. So I think we're nearly out of time, but I've just seen another question just squeeze in from Amy Boylan.
Yeah.
I often use review platforms to find the kind of words that people use. You've talked about using competitor sites, but do you think that's helpful too, using review platforms?
Yeah, no, Amy, that's a really good suggestion. I think, that's the reviews that people make of products, and particularly the adjectives, which is kind of, that they use to describe a product, I think is an incredibly powerful way of finding these topic ideas that they've got. A big part of the reason why Amazon is so successful, beyond all the kind of like crazy price stuff that they do, is the user generated reviews that they've got there. So if I'm searching for a particular product or service and someone's described that in the user reviews, that page is able to rank for terms that Amazon never thought of, just because the person who was reviewing them did so in a particular way. So that's I didn't mention it in the slides here, but I think Amy's doing a really good tactic there, which is to kind of go look at reviews of the product, find how people are describing the product. If they're describing it in that way in a review, there's a good chance they'll be searching for it in that way as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that this is a useful tactic for search engine optimization, because I think Sarah Richards, who's a content designer, and she spoke at our 2017 conference, she was talking about using review sites and Amazon sites like that to get the kind of the language that people use, not for optimizing for search, but just for optimizing for connecting with people. So instead of coming at people with your language, it's about getting their language and using speaking to the audience with the language that they themselves use. Yeah,
you'd be amazed the number of times I've exactly on that kind of pattern, where the ways in which you describe what you do and your customers describe what you do, there's often a very big difference between that, and search can be a great way of gaining an insight into that, in the same way reviews are a way of gaining that insight of how should we be talking about what it is that we do.
Yeah, Fantastic. Well, thank you, Kelvin. I think that wraps it up for today. So your slides will be on SlideShare later this afternoon.
Yeah. Hopefully,
right?
almost straight away, instantaneously, if I.
All right. Fantastic. And then, so if people want to come along to the next Brighton SEO, so I gather the last ballot has just occurred, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've just dished out the tickets for the ballot there for April's one. There's still chances to come along. There's either training courses. There's a copywriting SEO training course, actually. But there's training courses people can look into. They get a day of training plus the conference. There's some friends tickets, which are like low-cost versions of the tickets. And of course, sponsors often give away an allocation of tickets as well. So if you are interested in attending, keeping an eye on Twitter on the hashtag, there's plenty of ways you can pay a little bit of money and attend, but if you want to get a free ticket, there's still scope to do that. You just have to be a little bit ingenious, looking out for people doing competitions and enter a few.
Cool. And otherwise, you have another event later in the year, don't you?
Yeah, twice a year, April and September. So yeah, they come around in no time, that's for sure.
Keeps you busy. So if anyone wants to enter the next ballot, when would that be?
That will probably be May time.
In May. So if they keep an eye on your Twitter feed for Brighton SEO around May, that's a good time.
If they're on our mailing list, there'll be no escaping from it. You know how it works.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kelvin. That's been really interesting, very helpful, and brilliant. Well, hopefully we'll get you back for another aspect of SEO soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for listening on, and thanks for all the questions.